G'day and welcome to Gardening Australia. I wish you could smell the fragrances wafting up from this garden, but more on this later. Now, let's see what the rest of the team's up to.
I love to see bees on TV, but bees in my TV? Well, that's exactly what's happening because I'm converting my old TV into a bee hotel.
A really common problem people have with climbing plants is that they end up rushing to the top of the structure and you end up with bare bones below. There is a solution and it starts at planting.
Starting a garden from scratch. It's an exciting challenge, but to get it right, you need to do some site assessment and analysis. I'll show you how.
Just 35 kilometres southwest of Hobart is the beautiful Huon Valley. They've been growing apples in the area for over 170 years. So where better to find someone who really knows his apples than here. Comfortable?
Yep, no, it's fine.
Excellent. That's nice and tight. Can't see anything?
Can't see a thing.
Here we go. First one. Andrew Smith is a fourth-generation Tasmanian apple grower.
It's a golden delicious.
Oh. Andrew's great-grandfather William started the orchard here in the 1880s.
Pink lady.
All right. Even so, I wanted to test his credentials. There we go.
Fuji.
And now for the last one.
It's a pear.
I tried to trick you, but you succeeded on everything.
20 years ago, Andrew decided it was time for the family business to fully embrace organic farming methods. And if organic growing can succeed on such a large scale, you'd have to reckon there's got to be some lessons here for the home gardener.
How do you feed your trees?
Well, the definition for us about organic is non-synthetic products. So chook manure is a product that we use. There are a lot of commercial pelletised manure products out there on the market. We use a lot of seaweed.
What about pests and diseases? How do you control those?
Because we don't use synthetic insecticides, we're constantly trying to promote good beneficials in the orchards. Earwigs, for instance, control both light brown and codling moth for us by eating the larvae as they come down into the bunches. So, you know, the thing about Mother Nature is you don't want to fight it, you want to work with it. And, of course, pruning's a big part of that as well. This is your traditional sort of style of apple tree. Tino, this is a 25-year-old Golden Delicious on a seedling rootstock. There's been some really aggressive cuts which have promoted vigour at certain times, and at certain parts of the tree it's been let run with less vigour, and you can see here it's been let run and it's turned to fruit.
Almost an excessive amount of spurs on this.
So you start to see that by pruning you invigorate and you get more growth and more wood, and by not pruning you get an excessive amount of fruit, which can also create too many problems.
So how do you prune an old tree like this?
The first thing I want to do is get maximum light into the tree with a minimum amount of pruning cuts.
Yeah.
And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to pick out some big limbs which I think are stealing light from the tree, like this one here, and I'm going to come right back in at the trunk and I'm going to cut it out there. Doesn't have to be perfect, but I'm going to take that out and start to open this tree up. There's a couple more here which are very obvious ones, and the reason that these are obvious is because they're going back into the centre of the tree and stealing that sunlight. Remembering that the two most important components for growing fruit are sunlight and water. On a tree like this, I'm looking for 200 or 300 bits of nice fruit. So I'm going to start to reduce those, and I don't even have to use the clippers. I can quite simply just break these out like this. Now, when I'm choosing which ones to keep and which ones to leave, the first one that I will always take is the one underneath.
Yes.
The one on top is the one that the sap wants to come along and go up to, and he'll generally be healthier, and I'll take the ones underneath and leave him there. Bud splitting like this can set this tree up very nicely. What I'd like to show you now, Tino, is something very different from what we've just seen. So, as you can see here, this is what I would call a more commercial way of fruit production. And the first thing you can see here is that all the limbs are going down to the ground, not up to the sun.
Now, do you find the problem a lot of people have with espalier is that they'll bend the branch down and all the sap flow actually concentrates here and you get shoots out the top?
We find that all the time and we call it the cat's back. In fact, what happens is that the sap still wants to go uphill because you've made that arch and the sap's going up and then all the growth comes off the top of the limb. The most important thing when training your limbs down to make them more fruitful is that you have a very flat angle on these limbs here. The reason we're doing it is because the sap is coming up from the root system, wanting to go to the sun, and it has to turn this corner, which is like a brake, and so it doesn't travel with a lot of energy to the ends of these limbs, hence not making them grow strongly.
So you're getting less vegetative growth, but your fruit production isn't affected at all. In fact, it's enhanced.
Exactly. We're literally trying to turn them into fruit-producing machines, not wood-producing machines.
Yeah.
Fruity, 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 fruity.
So what are your rules of thumb with pruning this kind of tree?
Our rules of thumb are very simple. When you take your clippers out and you're going to prune your tree, I would always prune out the wood that is longer than your secateurs, and I would take that out. And now the energy that was going to go into that one is going to be dispersed evenly through all the fruit buds that are left on that tree and help grow a crop.
I really stand in awe of the Smith family. To have the courage and conviction to transition to organics and to be so successful on such a large scale is inspirational to us home gardeners who generally only manage the one tree.
People want to know what the lumpy bits are that have suddenly appeared on their lemon trees or even a lime tree. It's a wasp that has laid its eggs into the branches and stems and caused a swelling. They're quite large swellings. It's called gall, and it's a gall wasp that causes it. You can either live with it or you cut it right out.
Can you grow herbs indoors? Well, as far as I'm concerned, I reckon the taste you get from growing herbs outside in the elements is far superior because the essential oils are better out in the sun. However, you can theoretically grow herbs inside. What they'll tend to do is become a bit soft and sappy, they'll be a bit more prone to pest and disease problems. But if it's the only place you've got to do it, well, certainly give it a go.
A really common problem people have with climbing plants is that they end up rushing to the top of the structure and you end up with bare bones below. There is a solution and it starts at planting. Now, temptation would be to encourage the plant to rush to the top of the frame, but then you'll just end up with that growth up the top. Instead, I'm going to train it horizontally. So I'm going to pick the two best stems and actually tie them down. You could even peg them down. I've done this by pegging them to the ground with some tent pegs. And a little bit like espalier, what that does is it takes the energy out of a dominant bud and it actually shares it amongst all the buds along the stem, which means each of these stems will shoot, getting you nice coverage along the length of the fence. I'm just going to remove some of this extra growth in the middle because I want to push all that energy into those main stems. And as they grow away, these buds, I'm going to train them horizontally as well. And then I'm going to end up with great growth and coverage from the top to the bottom.
With winter upon us, I'd like to grow something in the community garden here at the ABC for the staff to pick and enjoy. The location of the garden has given me an idea. This outdoor terrace is named after the ABC's last official tea lady, Dot Strong.
Tea time, everybody.
A revered institution at ABC Radio is the Tea Lady, and here Dot Strong has reigned for more than 20 years.
A tea garden. Pick a few fresh leaves, pop them in a cup, add hot water. The perfect winter addition to any workplace. I've filled the pallet with a mixture of compost and quality potting mix. It's in a good position, northwest facing and sheltered. This is Camellia sinensis. It's where the traditional green and black tea you buy in the shops comes from, but you can grow it yourself. This variety is called Sayama Kaori, and it can grow right along the east coast of Australia. Tea's usually grown in hedges, but for our tea garden here, I think it's appropriate that this becomes our feature in the centre of our bed. I've got a stack of fragrant leafy plants to pack in around the camellia. Lemon verbena, a must-have in every garden. These leaves dropped in some hot water, it's such a fragrant tea. Perennial basil. This was one that my grandmother used to drop in and make a tea out of regularly in the winter. This is normal thyme. We've also got lemon fragrant thyme, traditionally known as something that can help with a sore throat. I've put these pineapple sages on the edge and you get that pineapple zing into your tea. So the first of our natives is this Hardenbergia. Its leaves are comparable to green tea leaves when they're steeped in hot water. This is a rambling climate. Next to it here and along that edge, I've gone with a plant called smilax, which is native sarsaparilla. And these wonderful tendrils here are going to spread out and run over the pavement. Everyone's familiar with the flavour of lemongrass in Asian cuisine, but it's a perfect addition to our tea garden. Traditionally, you chop up the stems finely to release the flavour, but you can also use the leaves to get that flavour out as well. Mint and lemon balm are happy in many soil types, but they love moist, semi-shaded conditions. They also have the potential to take over garden beds. So they're best grown in pots. Teapots, actually. I've drilled holes into the base of the teapot to allow for drainage, and then I've filed it down to get rid of any sharp edges. We'll start with the spearmint. I think that'll go perfectly in here. Then we'll go with traditional mint, chocolate mint, and finally, we've got our lemon balm. Now, if you don't want to drill holes in your teapots, you can always use your spout as a simple drainage hole. Out goes the excess water. Perfect. You can use a pallet like this, even a single pot or a couple of old containers, whatever you can find lying around at home or at work. But there's just one last job in the spirit and tradition of the ABC Tea Ladies. Tea's on, Michelle.
Oh, how are you doing?
I've just steeped a wonderful fresh mint tea.
You are the new Dot Strong.
Yeah, definitely the new Dot
Thank you.
Strong.
Oh, lovely. Can I take?
You may
They're my
have
favourite.
You may have a biscuit.
Am I allowed to dunk?
You may. Are you a dunker?
I'm a dunker.
You are a dunker. I'm thinking we could build a garden up here, extend a terrace, grow food.
That would be
garden.
wonderful if you can. And can you hang something out the side too?
All sorts of edibles. You can oversee it.
Brilliant.
What do you reckon?
Happy with that.
All right,
Please.
I'll get onto it.
Fabulous. Thank you.
See ya.
Starting a garden from scratch is a really exciting challenge, and the temptation is often to charge down to the nursery and buy all your favourite plants. But to build a really successful long-term garden and avoid some of the pitfalls along the way, a thorough site assessment is a must. But where do you start? Well, first of all, stand back. Arm yourself with as much information as you can. It reveals the site's limitations, of course, but it also unlocks the possibilities. Getting exact dimensions will ensure that everything fits in the garden. But it's also really useful for working out the amount of different materials that you'll need, how many plants you'll use, and importantly, helps allocate room for the future growth of those plants. It's important to accurately measure and plot all of the services on the property. Gas and water, but also things underground that you can't see, like power, phone, sewage. Dial before you dig and work out where they are. It will affect the design and what can go where. But more than that, it's a very expensive business if you damage them once works have begun. Understanding the topography of your block is critical. Now, for instance, this block has a gentle incline, but your block might be really sloping, which might lead to wet spots in the garden. Now, you could choose to get around that with retaining walls and terracing, or maybe you'll capitalise on it and build a pond, plant water-loving plants around it. Whatever it is, understanding the topography of your site, the high points and the low points, enables you to capitalise on them and turn those features to your advantage. Take photos of everything. Especially take photographs from inside the house and consider how you want the garden to look from the various aspects indoors. Doing this should save you from the all too common mistake of putting the back garden shed right in the middle of the best view from the house. This is where photos are great. They give an extra perspective on the borrowed landscape, what's outside your block that you might want to use. But they also highlight the problems. Screening issue, for example, in this case, the neighbour's washing and a shed. But it helps us to see what height the screening needs to go to get the job done. But it still keeps in play the beautiful magnolias next door, the lovely lagonaria a bit further back, and what looks to be a pretty big silky oak all the way out there in the background. Now, one thing we do not need a photograph to tell us is the huge visual impact of this wall and the neighbouring block of flats. It is so visually dominant. And of all the things documented on this site today, this is the big consideration. Understanding light is critical to garden design, where the sun rises and sets on your property. Now here, north is the big apartment block, and the sun tracks through the sky lower in the winter, of course, but pretty well directly overhead in the middle of summer. And understanding that helps you with a couple of things. First of all, it enables you to choose plants that are really happy in their aspect. But more than that, you can plant small deciduous trees or even large ones to manipulate the shade in your block and allow that beautiful, welcome, warm winter sun in through to the house and garden. Soil type is another big factor in determining the long-term success of the garden. It affects the types of plants you can grow and also how well they'll grow. So it's worth spending some time to dig some spade depth holes around the garden to check for rock and compaction, but also check for pH and check the drainage. And there are stories about this on the Gardening Australia website. Pretty well all soils can be improved with cultivation and the addition of organic matter. But whatever you do, start early and prepare the soil well before you are ready to plant. It's important to create a design that's in context with the architecture that it surrounds, but also the broader landscape. Here we've got quite a modern home, but it's in a fairly traditional street setting. So one way that you could deal with that is to choose some old plants or more traditional materials, but reinterpret them in a more modern way. By doing the hard yards of assessment before you start designing, you will be much better equipped to create a successful design filled with appropriate plants to create that gorgeous garden that you've always wanted. And next time I see you, I'll be taking you to a garden filled with beautiful, functional spaces that people just want to be in.
Believe it or not, I'm saving eggplant seed. This early long purple cultivar is a beauty, and I want to share the seeds. So I've waited until one of the fruits has turned yellow, indicating it's ripe and ready. Roughly chopped it. And put it in the blender with enough water to make a soup. Blend until smooth. Pour into a bowl. Add more water to improve separation. The seeds will sink. Remove the pulp, then strain the seeds into a sieve. Scrape them up. Spread them on newspaper and leave them to dry where they won't blow away in the breeze. Then store them as you would any other seed, with name and date of harvesting. I saved this eggplant seed last year. Now, if I keep it at room temperature, the seed will remain viable for 1 year. But if I slip this into the fridge, the seed will remain in tip-top condition for 3 years.
A sunny day, plants flowering, the chooks clucking, the veggies growing. There are so many things that make me happy when I'm out and about, including seeing and hearing my garden buzzing with bees. There are more than 1,500 species of native bees in Australia, and they play an incredibly important environmental role, working tirelessly as pollinators. So it makes sense that your garden is as bee-friendly as possible. That means providing food for them with flowers, water to drink, gardening organically without any sprays, and providing habitat, which means somewhere for them to live. Which is why I'm making a bee hotel. I'm using an old plastic TV. These are great because they have lots of vents in the sides, back and bottom for good air circulation. And I've put a bit of corflute up the top so the rain can't get in. You could also use an old computer monitor or even a hardwood box. Now, if you're going to use wood, make sure you don't use chipboard because it won't be weatherproof. Native bees are very choosy about where they want to live, so I'm going to provide them with different types of accommodation to appeal to the different species. Some species, like carpenter bees, like to build their nests into dead, pithy stems, and you can use plants such as blackberries, hydrangeas, grapevines, or in this case, I've got some dried fennel stems. I've just held these together in a piece of old bamboo, but if you don't have any dried, you can make your own from fresh stems, which will dry pretty quickly anyway. Simply strip off the foliage, and then cut lengths to ensure that you have at least 10 to 15 centimetres of pithy stem before any joints, because that's the depth they need to make their nest. Once you've got a lot of pieces cut, then you can simply tie them together with twine and put them into your hotel. I'm also using some bamboo stacked into an earthenware pipe. The principle is the same. You need to cut the bamboo just below a joint so you have 10 to 15 centimetres of hollow stem with an enclosed end to entice them in. Other bees, like leafcutter bees, would in nature live in borer holes. So I'm going to drill some holes into these cut logs to recreate that. Space them about 2 centimetres apart and to a depth of at least 10 centimetres. And make sure the timber isn't chemically treated. Bees love different diameter holes, between 3 and 8 millimetres, so mix it up a bit. Use sharp drill bits to minimise burrs so the tunnels are smooth and inviting for potential tenants. Blue-banded bees, like 50% of the South Australian species of native bees, actually like to burrow into clay-rich soils. So I've packed some sifted clay into these earthenware pipes, or you could do the same things into concrete building blocks, and then you simply push holes in. Now the holes need to be about 8 millimetres wide and again 10 to 15 centimetres deep. Now I think I've got enough materials, it's time to stack the TV. There are no real rules about how you put this together, but try and get a nice even spacing of the different types of habitat and pack it tightly so that nothing can move out of place. Finally, you can fill in any gaps with leftover pithy stems or small pieces of bamboo. In southern Australia, a native bee hotel should ideally be facing northeast in a sheltered, sunny position, possibly even with a bit of semi-shade, so some bees can have sun and some can have shade. The height should be over 1 metre off the ground and less than 2 metres. I can't wait to see what appears on this TV. I'm sure it'll all be B grade, but it's just the way I like it.
There's nothing better for me than a cup of tea. But that's it for this week. I hope you've taken lots of ideas from the show. And don't forget, you can jump on our website to collect plenty of fact sheets, or you can keep in touch with us through Instagram and Facebook. And if you really want to complete your weekend gardening fix, why not grab a copy of the Gardening Australia magazine? The August issue's out now. But for now, here's to tea.
I'm in gardening heaven. I'm surrounded by an amazing collection of cycads and bromeliads. I can't wait to introduce you to the couple behind it all.
Like me, the owner of this garden is a bit unconventional and unique. How would you describe the garden?
I'd describe the garden as feral.
Could you just tell me your name and who you are?
I'm Jane Edmondson, and I've been on Gardening Australia for nigh on 28 years, right from the very beginning.
Any kind of container that comes to your mind.